Hello. Okay, so I, like many of us, am trying to think about how we are going to make the changes we need to make in order to help ourselves. I think that a lot of people think that revolution is going to require violence. And I think that we are not in a time where people want to have a violent revolution. I think that the reaction to Luigi was one of support because everybody understands. Though I think his situation might be more complicated, I guess, as we learn more about his background. But everybody understood exactly what was happening there. So there were no questions from the public. But we have not seen a lot of copycats, and I think that's for a reason. The same reason why, what was it, January 7th, with them trying to seize the Capitol or whatever they did, you didn't see like a copycat reaction on the other side of the spectrum with that. Even with Black Lives Matter and with Ferguson, like the violence from actual like people protesting was minimal. You know, maybe there was damage to buildings, and yeah, in terms of people reacting to police, the clapback violent wise is really minimal. To school shootings, very minimal. I do not think we are in a generation of people, or even just in a time on Earth, where people are interested in having a violent revolution. I know that I'm not. If I look at myself in the mirror, seriously, I don't want to fight a war. I do not want to have to hurt anyone. I don't want to have to enact any type of violence. I really don't, and I don't think I'm going to. I don't think I have it in me. I'm sure there's somewhere where I can muster that if I needed to, but I don't really think so. And I think a lot of other people feel the same way, which is why it's not happening. And so we see a lot of, well, what can I do and why aren't we doing anything? And we're all passing a lot of judgment on ourselves in terms of how quickly we're reacting to what's happening right now. But to be honest, I think we're in a processing state because I don't know about any other time in history where it hasn't been, through a means of war, that there's been a big revolution, and so we're figuring out how to do things differently. And I think that's because we can. I think if we didn't have any other options, it would just be like waiting for the inevitable. But I think that the reason why we're all pausing and it feels like everybody's in standstill is because we are watching the development of a new strategy to revolution. And I think people like Gary's Economics and all of these channels on YouTube and on TikTok and across the internet that are doing their own forms of media and are releasing information, giving strategy, sharing important opinions and ideas. These are the new revolution tactics. What in a recent video that Gary's Economics posted, he talked about how to take over your country on YouTube, and he's talking about how the like extreme right, the alt-right, is that what they're called? How this is how they did what they've done to America. It's through the internet. It's through creating community online. And I think that the same thing can happen for us in general. I am at a point where I'm trying to get re-engaged with like the harder realities of what's happening. I have been staying briefly up to date on everything that's happening, but I have been tapped out of the details because, to be honest, I wasn't brave enough or ready to like get re-immersed. And that's my privilege. I realize that. I know that. I was never in doubt about that. But I just wasn't. Like, I feel like a survivor from the Black Lives Matter Twitter era of watching Black people die on the internet, and I wasn't ready. I'm so young. And that happened when I was a kid all the way through my teens. So like, I just wasn't ready to like tap back in and watch now like young kids and babies in Gaza like be dead in war zones. But that's where we're at on the internet, that we can watch that. That's where we're at in globalization, that we have access to people's lives and people's trauma and tragedy in that way. And it's a good thing because we're connected, and it's a horrifying thing because, like, you know, if you look away, then you're looking away. And if you're watching, then you're experiencing that. And you know that somebody else has experienced that. So there's a lot happening, and I think we all need to be patient with ourselves as we develop this new strategy. The world isn't going anywhere. Like, the world is burning. It's always been burning. The wars are happening. Wars have always been happening. And people are dying. And it's serious enough that we need to act. But I think that we should not confuse our standstill kind of nature as inaction. Because from what I see, there are a lot of channels on here rising. And these are channels that are radical, that are revolution based. So people are not inactive. People are brainstorming. That's what I'm seeing. People are brainstorming. People are beginning to create community. People are getting into alignment on what we think, on our paths. And I think soon we'll begin to see more evident action. But I think that it's not going to be the typical way. And we might experience a lot of disappointments and losses and further subjugation before we see the tactics really play out in person, because I really think that we are in like a re-strategizing era of like the people's revolutionary tactics on Earth. I think as a people, as a working class, just generally across the global population, we're re-strategizing because the introduction of this advanced technology, and I'm not talking about AI, I'm just talking about the internet. The introduction of the internet and of, personal cell phones, personal communication devices, social media, these things have completely disrupted the system at large and how we engage with our governments and how we engage with our oppressors at whatever point in time. And I think if we had cell phones and social media during the French Revolution, during the Haitian Revolution, during the Civil War, things would have looked a lot differently. And so we're seeing that play out in real time. It's affecting strategy of the people. And that's something that I'm holding on to maintain my own sense of hope, because I'm watching myself in freeze mode. I'm not out here particularly doing anything groundbreaking. I'm doing what I can, and today I was spending a lot of time thinking about like what more I can really do, how I can begin to divide my paycheck, to begin just giving out, and what other tactics I can take. I'm trying to think about everything at my disposal. I'm thinking about spiritual tactics I can take. I was thinking about fasting. I don't know. I'm throwing everything at the wall because we're in that kind of space, where there's no shame, like there's no uppity behavior when it comes to how you can contribute to the revolution. So yeah, but I've watched myself be in standstill and freeze mode, and it's not because I don't care. It's certainly not a lack of care. I've watched myself feel like a bystander when I have no intention of doing so, and I don't feel like I actually am. It's just that I'm not understanding, like, the actions. It seems like I'm waiting on something, and I'm not waiting on someone to come save me or give me the answer. I'm trying to do a lot of critical thinking and plan development, because I feel like there are more answers available. People have provided great answers, and we should follow up on those, because there's no point in reinventing the wheel on certain things that work for us. But I also think there's more to be discovered, and I think that now there's a lot of room for innovation and discussion as we have access to each other and we can share our ideas. And especially with, I feel like YouTube is going through an era right now. YouTube is at so many eras, and it's always been my chosen social media platform. But I think it's really going through an era right now in terms of becoming like the space for accessing political content and media. alternative forms of media and revolution strategy. And then finding people who share your desires in those comment sections. And I've found myself being a lot more active in comment sections as well, and just gathering up my bases of information. So something is happening. It's just not super obvious, and it's not in your face revolution to the point where it feels all good and like you're really making a change. Unless you are doing something that feels like that, and like big ups to you. But I don't think it means that nothing is happening. I think that for those of you who have been like me and maybe have been tapped out from the gritty, brutal details of what's happening, maybe it's time to tap back in if you feel ready for that, because I found that once I started watching videos again and looking at the videos of the war zones and things like that, it was hard at first, and I cried, and it was all of that kind of stuff. But then I just started thinking. And I think that's the empowering thing about seeing things like this, is that you can't watch for too long and just sit. It doesn't really, I feel like it doesn't act in the human spirit. Watching someone suffer like that, it activates you. It just does. It makes you start asking questions. And at first the questions were why? But then they started to become how? Well, what about this? Would this work? What does this mean? Why do they do this? What do they need? What is the missing layer? And the more you begin to question, the more you begin to break down, the more you begin to develop your own ideas of strategy. And we need all unique forms of ideas and in contemplation about revolution, especially because we are all kind of aligned on this being a class war, and genocide and all of these things being streamlined through wealth and capitalism and greed, whatever you want to call it. So with that kind of current becoming really dominant, it's great because we all kind of have something to jump off of, like a base point, and from there we can further develop and expand on our ideas. But I was saying in another video that like even just making lifestyle choices that are more economical for you and healthier for you ultimately ends up probably aiding in supporting these other causes that you care about. When you start to eat healthier, and so you're not buying a bunch of food with fructose corn syrup and a bunch of ultra processed foods, and maybe you're not eating as much processed meat and things like that, you're ultimately divesting your money from these companies that happen to be big businesses that happen to be supporting war and genocide and all of these things, or trying to steal your privacy and blah, 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 blah. So all of our choices are connected, especially your lifestyle choices. And so that's something I've been thinking about, just trying to get more on getting my lifestyle to be progressive, and doing what I can to have control over where my money goes and how I take care of myself, because how I care for myself ultimately is a part of the revolution. So I just want to share these thoughts because all hope is not lost, though it can feel like it, especially when you get back and you start to flood yourself with political information again. And I want to be clear, I was never tapped out. It's impossible to be, especially with the bubble I've created for myself. And we all have our own bubbles because of our algorithms. I've always been clued in to what's happening. It's just that I wasn't in the nitty gritty because I guess I just couldn't be. But now I can. And so I am. I'm not exactly excited about it. I don't want to watch people in war zones. I don't want to do that. I don't want to watch a 14-year-old girl vlogging her life in Gaza and knowing that there's a chance she could die. Like, I don't want to watch that. But I'm going to, because it's completely new. It's a completely new resource for them. And for us, like, we've never been able to do that before. Like, I can't imagine how revolutionary that would have been for Ferguson to have people being able to do, like, daily vlogs and showing what's happening on the ground. That wasn't really something I saw happening a lot. But it's a really great resource. And not only does it document history, but it's a source of income. So it's economic strategy. So yeah, I'm starting to do that, and we'll find other things, and then just trying to have more information so that I know what I'm talking about and I have things to build on, and I'm not overwhelmed with like research fatigue. Just taking in information every day so that once I need to know something, I already know it. So that's the point I'm at. It is very difficult living in such a brutal time, but then I try to remind myself that like we literally have never had an era that wasn't brutal. There was always something horrible happening. This is not new. It's just that we are experiencing it for our own selves, you know. But there's never been a time. There's never been a time without human suffering, and that's not to normalize it. That's just to say that we are extremely resilient and we can get through this because we have. And the human suffering that exists on the planet right now is a lot better than it has been in the past. I mean, you could be in ancient Rome, you know, imagine. So things have changed. In some ways, there's been relief. In many other ways, there have been just reinventions of, you know, old forms of torture. We know that. We don't need to be reminded. We know the world is still sick and that people are still horrifying. But we've also witnessed the people rise up and change the world time after time after time. And all of their work is not lost. You know, it's not for no reason. And even though we continue to have to fight these battles, it's not their work. That doesn't mean their work is meaningless. It just means it's a long fight. It's a long fight out of poverty. It's a long fight out of this type of inequality because it's deep. You can't possibly have billionaires on this planet with people who are paying $1,000 for sugar in a war zone and to try to simplify the economic situation and the fight that we have, this class war that we have, and this general fight against inequality and greed and oppression and power and hate that we have. It's complicated, it's deep, it's messy, and we're removed from so much information that we just have to rely on the little bits and pieces that we know and intuition and then history and just general, like, I'm gonna just try this thing out, you know. So our backs are constantly up against the wall, and yet we push forward, and that's something I'm always really proud of the people for. And I think most of us have always been the people. You know, most of us descend from people who are the people. You know what I mean? Not many of us come from up top. So that's also a sign of how resilient and incredible you and your ancestors are at fighting, because you're still here. Look at the people represents a major part of the population, a majority of the population on this planet. So if you're all still here, clearly we are survivors. We're not just here because they're letting us be here. We're here because we're powerful and we're fighters. And that's important to remember. They're not always the decision makers. It just feels that way. And it can be so easy to get tired. I get it. So take your break, because there is no way to avoid burnout once it comes. It's like horrible and it really slows you down. So take your breaks when you need it, and then come back when you can, because the fight will always be here. So like, no need to, you know, kill yourself trying to get everything done in the now. It's going to be a step-by-step process, but I see things moving, even if they're not at the pace that we would like. And there will be a lot of grief and sorrow mixed in with it, and that is this life. But it doesn't have to all be that way, and there's a lot you can do to bring happiness into your world. And helping and showing up brings that joy just as much as it brings the grief. So it ends up being balanced. But doing nothing, you know, it doesn't feel good. So yeah, I guess that's all for now. Toodaloo.